Hi, I'm Kevin, and welcome to our series Money Matters. Today we will be talking about the Trinidad and Tobago budget that was just released by the Minister of Finance.
Hey guys, I'm Ashtak, and as Kevin said, we are going to be taking a deeper dive into the Trinidad and Tobago budget today. So, just from a overview perspective, the budget that was released projected that we're going to be in another fiscal deficit for 2023, 2024. And it's not surprising because the theme of the budget was building capacity for diversification. And we all know that when a country is investing in itself and investing in diversification in particular, there is going to be a deficit in place. So basically what that means is that the projected income is going to be a bit lower than the amount that's going to be spent. What we want to do today is kind of go through whether or not the money that's projected to be spent was allocated fairly, whether it was something that we believe is going to benefit diversification of the Trinidad and Tobago economy, and more importantly, how it impacts us as citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. So, Kev, what was your initial thoughts on the budget?
Initial thoughts are I'm actually not surprised that we have a fiscal deficit. I mean, looking at where we are in our country's history and, all these global factors at play, it is so clear that we have to reduce our reliance on oil and gas.
Yep.
Something that stands out to me in this budget is that we are still trying to exploit this as much as possible with deals from BP, Shell, and I think a combined deal with Venezuela.
Yeah.
I think those things make a lot of sense, and we need to focus on that while the world progresses and transfers to renewable energy.
Yeah, what's notable is that the oil revenue that's projected has actually decreased. So we're projecting about $8 to $10 billion less in oil revenue. It's somewhat comforting that we are also projecting approximately $5 billion increase in non-oil revenue, but it's interesting to see how that dynamic works. I was quite surprised at the price of oil and gas that the budget was pegged on. In my opinion, it was slightly on the upper end of the spectrum. However, I know that geopolitical tensions right now may actually influence the price of oil and gas within the fiscal year to come. So, I mean, it is quite interesting. What I would like to see, however, is how they appropriate the relevant allocations. So I know that in terms of expenditure, we project to spend the most amount of money on education and training. And in my opinion, that's something that's going to be very important to diversifying the economy because, as I'm sure everyone's aware, it's not going to be a one-person effort. It has to be a joint effort between the public and the private sectors, and us as citizens need to play a very important role in that.
You touched on a really important point, and that is education, and something that I think that is needed, but I wish was done just a little bit better. And I say this specifically with reference to Gov't.
Yeah.
So we look at that program and how it was executed, and there's so many people who, benefited from it, but I don't think we have quite seen the returns to the country itself. I look at our effort to digitize and move into this technological space that we're in right now, and I can't help but think, what about these STEM graduates? We should have been prepping them properly to take up the mantle and, position Trinidad and Tobago as really the center of excellence for the Caribbean and Latin America.
Yeah, that's quite an interesting point. I think that technology is, going to play a very important part in the diversification efforts, along with, helping with education. I think, we've seen it in all aspects, especially because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Things like working from home and being able to have classes online reduced a lot of congestion on the roadways, which was, a technological impact. When we look at moving into diversification efforts, agriculture in particular, there are now the effects of climate change that we have to take into account. And in my opinion, technology and the advent of new types of farmings like hydroponics and vertical farmings and so on is going to help diversifying into a sector which may face risks that it didn't face over the last 5 or 6 decades. So I think we have to embrace it. I think it's something that's important, and it's definitely going to play a big part in diversifying.
I think that's an excellent point. The government has been investing a substantial amount of money into agriculture over the past few budgets, but what is notable to me is that we are not actually making the return that we need from these exports. And I think, like you rightly said, the combination of agriculture with technology in terms of hydroponics, vertical farming, etc., can be the catalyst needed to push the industry forward. So perhaps we need to stop thinking about it in a silo and think about it in a more connected manner.
Yeah, and when you start developing an agricultural sector, what it allows you to do is increase your exports of products, but also reduce your reliance on imports.
Definitely.
And a knock-on effect of that is reducing the foreign exchange demand in Trinidad. And I think, in my opinion, that was something that was also a very interesting point in the budget. The strategy that's going to be employed by Trinidad and Tobago now in terms of how we manage our foreign exchange liquidity.
Yes, I was very surprised by that. You know, credit to the minister there. I was not expecting that solution. I've been looking at the foreign exchange situation, from a different perspective, just thinking about the lack of foreign exchange that we have. But this strategy to attract, Trinidadians who have forex back into the country is pretty novel. How do you think that Key might do this?
Yeah, I think it's, you're going to have to create a lot of security because as an oil and gas nation, it's not a secret that we've exploited a lot of foreign exchange. We've had a lot of foreign exchange come into the money and come into the country and invested into the country because of our, rich nation. Yeah. And it's not necessarily that foreign exchange has disappeared. A lot of Trinidadian citizens hold foreign exchange, but they don't want to keep it in Trinidad for fear of lack of liquidity. They want to, keep it abroad, or like a lot of people take their money and convert it and send it abroad. And I think that's important to be able to try and attract foreign exchange back. How they're going to do that remains to be seen, because managing liquidity is important, yes, but ensuring the security of that money is more important.
And you bring a good point up there, which is security. And I think a lot of these measures that we're seeing right now, they are well intentioned, especially around diversification and giving, loans to small and medium sized businesses. But what really plagues our society right now is crime.
Yeah.
Notably, the government has increased the amount of money allocated to national security in this budget. I think that is a good move, and that generally speaking, it makes sense. However, I think we need to address the fundamental issues that we may have with the police force. There might be corruption, for example.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, as the economy and as Trinidad and Tobago goes into transition, we need to understand that there are certain hardships that come with transition. And the knock-on effects of moving from oil and gas to different types of industries means that a lot of the oil and gas employees are going to be without a job. And so, when you think of unemployment, what that brings, whilst the minister would have quoted stats in the budget that said, we are record low unemployment, I find that a little bit difficult to believe, being a citizen who's going to work every day and seeing the job market around me. But there are a lot of things that comes with unemployment, notably increased levels of crime, increased levels of, frustration, which needs to be managed, but also not, not allowed to roam, or not allowed to run freely without any type of, hold being placed on it.
You're definitely right. And I think it really affects the ease of doing business and all these other factors that contribute to the productive part of our society.
Yeah, Kev, we've heard the minister say that we have inflation now turning down, and he would have said that they're now going to increase the minimum wage from $17.50 per hour to $20.50 per hour, which is supposed to have benefited 190 to 200,000 persons approximately. But what I think is important for us as citizens to realize is there's so many other things that are going to happen. So whilst, yes, income tax has not been increased, there's now going to be a property tax which is going to take effect. there are now going to be certain subsidies on utilities such as water and electricity, and even further reduced on gas. And so all of these things go into the cost of living, and so we have to ask ourselves: is a $3 increase really going to benefit, or outweigh all of these negative drawdowns of the increased cost of living?
That's a really important question. I think the increase is needed, it's welcomed.
Yes.
But I also see the signals right now that, subsidies are going to be removed as time goes on. Right now, we have one of the cheapest electricity rates in the world. And I think we are positioning ourselves to see things increase. We no longer have the money, quite frankly, to support a subsidy-based lifestyle. So I think coming in the future years, we will see some of these things be removed as we continue to diversify away from oil and gas.
Yeah, I mean, Kev, just wrapping up here, I just think that this budget had a lot to digest. It was
Definitely.
over 4 hours of the Minister of Finance speaking and over 150 pages of his actual budget statement. So I think there's a lot for the Trinidadian public to digest. There's a lot of interpretation that will be, placed on what these things mean and how they will impact us. But I think, as we progress along this series, we can give certain tips in terms of how to manage your finance given these changes in fiscal policies.
Definitely. And while we might not always be able to explain all of these nuances in a short period of time, I think what's important to note is that there's so much that we could do as citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, and that we need to stay tuned and stay aware of the fact that money matters.